like to acknowledge the Gadigal people on this land together. It may look like very attractive council chambers, but it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. That's a good thing. I'd also like to acknowledge the Chilean ambassadors who are here tonight, Ali and Muchaba. And I guess I'd like to begin by saying that in terms of what we're trying to portray tonight, I'm really the support act, the warm-up act for the main event, which is really the young gentlemen at the back who are going to speak about their experiences of Afghanistan, which is far deeper, more profound, and has far more significance to tell to us than just listening to me speak, I think, in lots of ways. So I'd like to acknowledge both of you and the work that you were doing, and thank you for being here. I'd like to thank Di and Chill Out for keeping the show on the road in some particularly difficult days. Now, as Di said, the Edmund Rice Centre has been involved in this work now for some 8 or 9 years now. This work began initially when we were at a Christmas party in the backyard of our previous location in Homebush, and a number of refugee advocates and refugees themselves were gathered and were swapping stories about people who'd been removed from Australia and had gone back to the danger that they sought protection from, and that the rumour was that some of those people had in fact been killed. And everybody had a little bit of the story, but no one actually had the evidence of this. The next day, a wonderful sister, a Dominican sister, knocked on my door and said she could write, she could research, she wanted a job and she didn't want any money. And he said, "Sister, you must have been born in a stable, please come in." And she turned up the next day with another nun in the late 70s, and they went about tracking down. So at that stage, about 253 people in 22 countries had been removed from Australian detention centres, and we then set out to go and find them and interview them. The good news is, over the course of this work, a number of those people who had been removed from Australia have now actually, and were sent back to places like Syria, they weren't Syrian, any Arab that was sort of floating around the Middle East was often sent to Syria, Kuwaiti Badoons, Iraqis, Palestinians, Iranians, and some of those people from Syria, from Sri Lanka, from Palestine, from Iraq, and from Iran, who were sent back to danger, we believe, have now actually been resettled in the United States, and in Canada, in New Zealand, in Sweden, and in the United Kingdom. Now, just this afternoon, I did a round of media interviews outlining some of the things that we discovered in the last visit to Afghanistan, and the department came out with a very firm and knee-jerk response, which was to say, none of this information has been substantiated yet. That we give everything that we produce to the department, we take it to the United Nations. And the interesting point is this work has been substantiated by the governments of the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Sweden. Because those people who came here seeking asylum have been resettled in those places, which begs the question, what is it that those jurisdictions understand what it is to be a refugee, that somehow in the course of the last 10 to 12 years we've lost or forgotten? And I put it to you that this has become such a political football in Australia since the Tampa period that it's a source of much heat and very little light. And so tonight I just want to go through some of the findings we made on this recent visit, some of my understandings of what we may be able to do this a bit better, and I guess really it's a case of fastening your seatbelts for the next 12 months and the run into this election. I think Di's right. The difference between this and when we started on this road, and on this particular tranche of this work, was that there was the hope of an alternative government, of an alternative position. What we've got at the moment, both sides saying who can out John Howard, And the alternative of Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison in charge of this portfolio is quite, it's quite shuddering, really. The opposition are advocating a return to Nauru. Now, I was recently on Nauru. Nauru is a place that is one of the poorest, if not the poorest, nation in the Pacific region. It has been absolutely decimated by the policies of various Australian corporates and the neglect of Australian governments. There's not a wall of a house in Nauru that hasn't got a hole in it. There's not a window that's not cracked. The detention centre, the topside detention centre that Mr. Abbott just last week said, we can open Nauru tomorrow. Did you hear him say that? We can open it tomorrow. Well, actually interesting, the topside camp doesn't exist. There is no camp at topside any longer. There's about 3 buildings left standing up there. The rest have all been taken away by the locals and used for constructing other houses or patching up what they've got in terms of their own buildings. It is now actually, topside camp is an ecological reclamation project funded by the Japanese government. There was a second smaller camp on Nauru, which is down close to the town, and it is now the only fully functioning primary school in the country, because the previous primary school burned down. So for Mr. Abbott and Mr. Morrison to say we can open Nauru tomorrow, they've got to somehow transplant from the moon another centre, put it at topside and get rid of the Japanese government. Or they've got to get rid of the kids in the school. Now when they went out to Nauru to visit, to see where the camps used to be, they went on the weekend and they had the photographs taken on the Sunday in the school. And if you Google it tonight, you go home lamenting another New South Wales lost in the state of origin. You Google this up, you will see them standing in front of a window in the school with the kids' pictures behind their heads. You see, there's a lot of myths that are perpetrated around this issue and that are propagated that our public officials and our politicians are not being held to account. Now that's at the level of rhetoric and policy and frankly mischief making. But at the end of the day, what was underscored for us in this last visit to Afghanistan is fundamentally clear. Is behind the machinations around policy lie the lives of very real people. And I have to say that, again, on this visit, the things we uncovered really, I found shameful as an Australian. And to be in Afghanistan on a Tuesday and then be back in Australia on a Thursday was akin to probably, I guess, what it would be like leaving Earth and going to Mars. Because it's hard to believe the reality that people have had to live through when they are faced up to war. I'd love to get Alan Jones and a pile of politicians on both sides and Cardinal George Pell and to take them into Afghanistan and actually 2 things, to understand the beauty and the wonder of the Afghan heart of the people, and that Afghanistan is a country before it's a war, and that where people live, who love other people, who have names, who have families, who have children, and in spite of the great difficulties that they face, are able to hang on to their humanity. I come back to this country, I turn on the radio, I listen to the shock jocks, I hear the debate in Parliament, I read the Murdoch press. And it's almost like compassion for people is somehow a form of weakness, when in lots of ways it's our only civilising strength. And the policy that we've got in place on both sides is shameful. And when you get this policy wrong, people die. And sadly, that's what we found on this last visit. I'd just like to take you to some of these findings. So we were in Kabul, in around Kabul, in late February and mid-March. We interviewed a number of 31 asylum seekers who'd been returning from this country. All but 2 of those people that we interviewed, we believe that are currently living in extreme danger and hold a well-founded fear of persecution. We confirmed the deaths of another 2 returnees, Mohammed Hussein, whose death we had reported to us and about 18 months ago, and we've been able to formally confirm that. Mohammed Hussein was someone that we met on a previous trip, who told authorities here and when he was on Nauru, and I will say about Nauru shortly, that if he was sent back because of his political affiliations, he would be targeted and killed by the Taliban. He wasn't believed, he was sent back. He was given a form that had a blank sheet with different reasons, and tick next to the box was, you have been found not to have a well-founded fear of persecution. However, that form was not signed and it wasn't dated. No name appeared on it. He was sent back, he was kidnapped in the early 2009. He escaped in September of that year, went over the border into Iran, where he was arrested, sent back into Afghanistan, where he contacted us. He said they're coming after him again. He was kidnapped once more, taken down to his home village in Ghazni province. And he was thrown down the well in front of 35 members of his family, and a hand grenade was thrown in after him and blew his head off. Now, he told people this would happen, and it happened. Now, this was well accounted for in newspapers. We spoke to representatives of various NGOs from the area who also confirmed it. Similarly, we've been to the graves of children who had died when their parents were sent back. And you know, and to this day, the department will say, have you got any evidence? We say, well, there's the grave, there's a newspaper account, there's the hospital record, there's an eyewitness account. This is what Ashiana would say, the chief NGO, this is what Human Rights Watch say, this is what the Ban Ki-moon has said. And still we get people in Australia saying, you're sure you've got enough evidence? Something else is going on here rather than the need for that. We also confirmed that Shahid Ahmadi, who was in Australia for 3 years, was also killed. And Ghulam Payador was from Christmas Island, sent to Nauru, and he's a good friend of mine. And just last October he was kidnapped and on the road to Ghazni, and has disappeared. People presume he's been killed. We can't confirm that. We met with, of the 31, just some of the stories that people tell. Abdul came in this day, had a rocket fired through his house last December. His wife was killed, his father was killed. He's now in hiding in Kabul with 6 children under the age of 9. He brought the smallest 3 with him. The boss of Ashiana, which is the largest NGO there, and Ashiana is responsible for the 45 camps that now ring Kabul, made up of internally displaced people. Kabul was a city that was built to cope with about 400,000 people, 500,000 people. It's now home to 4 million people. So you can imagine the infrastructure, the difficulties that people face there. Mohammed Engineer Yusuf is the leader of this organisation, who told us that he found the organisation found a 17-year-old minor last September who was sent back from Australia and ended up living on the street. He was found by his workers homeless and ill. Now, we didn't get to meet him, so at this stage we are still seeking cooperation of that case. But nevertheless, as far as the local Afghan organisation that works mainly with Afghan children, this is an issue that they brought to us. The majority of the 31 that we met are unable to live with their families because of the risk their simple presence poses to them. We met one famous, well-known documentary filmmaker and critic of the Taliban and critic of the Karzai government who makes films, who's won awards for his movies in Europe and in India, and he came to Australia after being hunted out by the Taliban, and he was sent back from Nauru. We met a Christian gentleman who has worked with the American forces because that's the only work he can get, which is like having a big excellent in Florida. He's not safe anywhere in Afghanistan. Mohammed Karim Rizai, who helped us greatly in the making of the documentary Well-Founded Fear, and who most recently has assisted SBS in the making of the second series of Go Back to Where You Came From, which is one of the reasons why we were in Afghanistan this time, was to work with that crew. Now he's got his family hiding in Pakistan, and he tried to bring them back, but within about a month of having his children back with him, it became too dangerous. Threats were made against him because he's Ismaili, because he's living in a difficult area, and his father had also been killed, so he sent his family away. And I sat with him one night, as his daughter ran up. And she said to him, you know, she said, Daddy, what sort of father are you that I can't go to school? You can't live with us. We aren't a family. Look what you've done to us. And he just burst into tears. And he said, look, if I could live in Afghanistan, I would. He said, if Afghanistan would be safe tomorrow, I'd go straight over the border, I'd get my kids and I'd bring them back here. He said, we want to live here. We don't want to live in Australia or Malaysia or Sweden or Germany. We want to live here. Which, time and again, we heard this story. You know, and you listen to Ray Hadley, you listen to Alan Jones, you read the Murdoch Press, you think everybody on the planet wants to come to the fortress, wonderful land of Australia. It's not true. It's not true. It might be true in some cases. But fundamentally, that's an issue about us that goes to our history, about people trying to get into this wonderful place. And yet, if you look at this nation, you know, you see that there is a malaise across the place. You know, the economy could be going gangbusters, but people aren't joining clubs. And I think one of the difficulties we've got to face with this issue is that it's far easy to apportion blame. Find someone to blame rather than deal with the causes. So even though we know that last year the number of asylum claims to Australia fell 9%, globally they went up 20%. And so when the M2 gets clogged up, the M4 gets packed with traffic, when unemployment rates are worried, people worry about their kids, they worry about their mortgages, what's going on with interest rates, whose fault is it? Afghan refugees. It seems to me there's this illogic that's going on in the current discourse, and that's why I don't blame the department for this. I fundamentally blame the politicians, because they drive the policy. And I have to say, you won't hear me go publicly criticising overtly the department, because we could not have done this work without the assistance of good people in the Department of Immigration. Good people who have, at very high levels, have come to us in the past and said, you know, yes, there are cases to be made here. Give us your top 40 and we'll try and bring them in through Dubai. This was 2 years ago. I was on holidays and was invited to come back to Sydney by the senior official in the department. I brought with me, and I checked this with him this afternoon, the CEO of the Refugee Council. And we sat there as the government made an offer to bring in between 20 and 40 people quietly from Dubai. We agreed to this. But of course, as soon as the boats began to turn up, about 18 months ago, they've all gone into moratorium. All gone into moratorium. Now, we've had people resettled in various countries around the planet from other places, but we've yet to see anyone properly resettled back from Afghanistan. This last trip we met an illiterate man who was sent back from Nauru, was given a form and told the form indicated he had to be sent back to Afghanistan. You have to go now. When we looked at the form, it said no such thing, only that his case had not been decided yet. Each returnee that we've met over the years was told you can go back because Afghanistan is safe now, the United States are in charge, and the Taliban are gone. Each were promised $2,000, which I got in writing last week from the Department of Immigration. However, of the people we've interviewed, most have received between $400 and $1,060 given to them in an envelope on a plane by an official who wasn't from the Australian government. There was no assistance with accommodation promised. Again, we heard that everybody was provided would be provided with employment at a factory called Jungalak outside Kabul. There was no working provided. There was no factory at Jungalak. In fact, on this last trip, we could not find anybody who could tell us where there was a place called Jungalak. So, the government liked to say that the people who went back from Nauru in particular, and the 6 people who have gone back since the MOU was signed with Afghanistan in January of last year, have gone back voluntarily. I put it to you that if people have been made promises that have turned out to be false, that's not a voluntary return, that's a coerced return. And that, when people go back to face the danger they sought protection from, then that's got to come into the obligations we have under the convention not to refoul people. It's our belief that these people have been refouled.